We've got a growing collection of indoor plants that is slowly turning our house into a botanical garden. As our leafy residents multiplied, I realized we needed a proper way to display them, which meant it was time to build some plant stands. Now, most of the DIY plant stand videos and plans that I looked at when this project was still just an idea used 2x4s and pocket holes, which is easy, quick, and functional, not really the kind of project that I was interested in doing. So I'm using only traditional joinery techniques in this project, and I'm not using fasteners of any kind. So no screws, no nails, and no glue, just some good old craftsmanship. I've also developed a romantic fascination with the American West and all of the associated styles of design, artwork, architecture, and furniture. So as I designed these plant stands, I've incorporated a lot of the features that are typical of mission style furniture combined with sleek and clean lines that are characteristic of modern designs. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I built these mission inspired modern plant stands. The first thing I did was make the legs. I'm not going to focus on the lumber milling process here in this video, but I did start with some odd shaped lumber that needed to be milled to be usable for this project. And I only intended to make 2 plant stands that would have been the same size, and that was all I was going to make. But when I was done, I brought them inside, set them up, put a couple of plants on them, and the boss asked for more. So I ended up making 6 in total. There's 2 sets of 3, each set having a small, medium, and a large plant stand that are different heights and also different widths across to accommodate different sized plants. I said these were inspired by mission-style furniture, which is typically made from white oak or cherry, but what I had on hand was sapele, so that's what I used. And even though it lacks the distinctive grain pattern of quarter-sawn oak or the long flowing grain in cherry, it has a very rich color when finished that's similar to mission furniture, and it still looks great. With the legs now cut to the right dimensions, I cut mortises in them that will accept tenons on the arch support pieces. And to make this easy, I clamped 2 pieces of wood to my bench for stops so that I could cut part of the mortise, slide the leg over a little bit, and then cut again until the whole length of the mortise was done. I was excited for this because I restored this mortiser, and this would be my first time using it for a project. You can click on the link in the corner now to watch my video of the restoration process, and I've also included a link to the video in the description. One of the legs had a crack running through it vertically, but I couldn't tell how large or deep it was until I cut the mortises. So rather than throw it out and make another, I repaired it with the best method of forcing glue into tiny spaces that I know of. And I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute, you said you didn't use any glue in this project. Well, I only used glue for this repair and one other you'll see later, but not on any of the joinery that actually holds the plant stands together. And you can't even tell, which to me feels like a tree that's fallen with no one around to hear it. With the legs just about complete, I moved on to making wooden templates for the arched supports. And if you're interested in making plant stands of your own, I've included a link in the video description to where you can download plans with paper templates like I'm using here. Also detailed step-by-step instructions and all the needed measurements. I cut out the bottom of the arch with the bandsaw, making sure to cut as close to the line as possible without actually touching it. Every little dimple, bump, and imperfection in the curve will show up in the final pieces because I'm going to use a pattern bit at the router to copy from the template. So with this in mind, I spent a lot of time with the wooden template in the vise, filing and sanding the curve to be as smooth as possible. This is also why I made it out of pine, a softwood rather than plywood, which I think made the refinement of the curve quicker and easier. Then I scooted over to the table saw with the completed template and used it to set a stop to cross-cut the boards that will be the arch supports to the right length. And next up was cutting the tenons. If you've checked out any of my other videos, you've seen my appreciation for things of the past manifested through the restoration of old tools. So as I considered my options for how to cut the tenons, I couldn't ignore the tenoning jig sitting on the shelf with its fresh paint and shiny cast iron surfaces, which is another tool that I restored, and with the work that I put into it, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to put it to work for the first time. Of all the ways to cut these tenons, the jig probably wasn't the most accurate, but I was excited to give it a go. So I cut the edges of the tenons with the jig, and for the faces, made several passes with the dado blade. And then I slapped double-sided tape onto the wooden template and stuck it to the workpiece. I cut out the curve with the bandsaw, being even more careful not to cut the template because I very much did not want to make another one. I then went over to my makeshift router table thing I have clamped into my vise to cut the curve on the workpiece flush with the template using a pattern bit, and then I repeated this 11 more times, which actually went pretty quickly. One of the key features I wanted to incorporate in the plant stands was to make them collapsible so it'd be easier to store them if they weren't being used, like when we accidentally kill some of our plants, but before we bought new ones. So I used a half-lap joint. My only trouble with this was that I left the arch supports just a tad thicker than they were supposed to be, which should have been exactly the same thickness as the dado stack I used to cut them. So I made one pass and had to trim just the tiniest bit off with a second pass so the two pieces fit together without being too loose. They didn't all fit together as snug as this one did, but they're all tight enough that they hold together firmly. Next, I cleaned up the cheeks and edges of the tenons with a block plane and a chisel, checking the fit in the mortise as I went. I don't own a shoulder plane, so as I've had to do many times before, and certainly will have to do in the future, both in the shop and outside of it, I had to make do with what I've got. It's a good reminder, and one that I often need, that woodworking has reinforced again and again to be resourceful, to persevere, and to be joyful in doing so. Well, I've got my 8 legs and 4 arch pieces that are going to make up the 2 plant stands. These are all pretty much done and they fit together quite snugly, and I'm happy with that so far. As I mentioned earlier, the tenons here on these arch pieces are going to be through tenons. So they're going to go through the mortise and stick out the back of each of these legs by 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to chamfer them with a block plane, which I've never been very good at. But what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to set my marking gauge also to 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to mark that all the way around. I'm going to mark the top as well. And then that will give me a solid reference point as I am using the block plane to create those chamfers so that they have a consistent angle and that they're done the same across all the different pieces. I'm going to do that both on the ends of the tenons as well as on the tops of the legs. I think that's going to soften them just a little bit and make them look really nice. So each plant stand has 4 legs, and each plant stand also has 2 arch supports that have 2 chamfered ends for the through tenons. So that's 8 chamfered ends and 32 individual chamfers per plant stand. And I'm making 6 plant stands in total. I'm not an actuary, but I believe that's 192 chamfered edges. So with a little bit of patience and some ibuprofen after being hunched over with these in a vise for a while, everything came out looking pretty good, especially on the through tenons. Next, I used the card scraper to remove some of the slight saw marks that were left and sanded all the parts to 220 grit. I also knocked down the corners a little bit with some sandpaper so things were more pleasant to handle. Then I could put one of these bad boys together and see what it looked like. So now I've dry assembled everything, and the way that I'm going to lock these into place is by drilling holes here and then using a dowel to lock it all into place. In order to do this, I had to drill through the assembled halves of the plane stands so the holes would align perfectly. I rigged up some stops at the drill press so that I could drill one hole, then slide the whole assembly over just a little bit, drill the next hole. I would do one side,
drive in my dowels, and then repeat for the second side. I was a little nervous that the tenon would move ever so slightly, causing the two halves to be misaligned, potentially getting things out of square, causing the whole thing to wobble or not sit right, but that wasn't the problem that I should have been worried about at all.
Well, I just broke one of these legs. Hammering in a dowel, snapped it right across, so time for surgery.
When I was driving in the dowels, I placed small blocks underneath the legs to get the whole assembly off the tabletop so that the dowel could come out the bottom. However, I placed them under the ends of the legs, and as I was pounding away on the dowel, I put too much pressure in the middle of the leg, and it just snapped. It only happened with this one, which was one of the large stands, and after I finished with the repair, I trimmed the dowels with the flush cut saw and smoothed them over with a block plane and some sandpaper. When I was done with that on all of them, I laid out all four halves of the large plant stands and asked the boss if she could tell which one I broke, and she couldn't find it. So, another tree fell without anybody around to hear it. I chose to use tung oil for the finish because it's more water resistant than other finishes like Danish oil. And it probably doesn't really matter, but I thought it might hold up better over time since they'll generally be around more moisture and there will be plants sitting in them that, in theory, are going to get watered. Well, here I'm setting up a set of the plant stands with one of each size, and as I mentioned previously, they're collapsible for easy storage. Although I can happily report that I haven't had the need to take any of them apart and store them because all of our plants are alive and well. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel, and if you'd like to build some of these plant stands for yourself, I've included a link in the video description where you can find plans to make them. Thanks for watching.